welcome to In the Spread. I'm Captain Chad Bryson, and we're going to do another fly tying video for you today. This is a variation of some of the other stuff I've done, but it's a great fly. It's called the River Raptor, and you can see it's got deer hair, bucktail, some feathers, different stuff. The biggest difference in this fly and like the double deceiver, the flaming chicken, and all of that is this is a single hook fly. And you know, in a lot of places you can't fish a double hook fly, which are primarily what I do in order to achieve the articulation. You do that, but this one's tied a little different, using some different materials that we haven't done before, and it's also a little smaller profile fly. It started out, this was the first variation of the River Raptor, and you can see I kind of tied that one in a brown trout pattern. It's a little more low profile. This is a fresh tie, so they're always going to look a little taller and a little bigger until you get them in the water and they thin out a little bit. But we're going to get right to it, show you how to tie this one so you can stuff some huge fish. Alright, so here's the River Raptor. We're going to tie this one today. It's an articulated fly with only one hook. I'm going to go over the tools that we're going to use. Again, like most of my flies, it's nothing really too complicated as far as, in the way of tools and everything, but most important is probably the vise. I like the Dyna-King Barracuda vise. It's a rotary vise. It's got a lot of great features when you're tying these big flies. Lots of room, big heavy steady base. It's pretty critical. You don't have to use a Dyna-King, that's just what I like. A lot of other good vices out there. Renzetti is another one that comes to mind that produces a similar product. Most importantly, the rotary part is the most critical. Next is the bobbins. I use ceramic tip bobbins with gel spun thread. Holds the material nice and tight, doesn't build up a really tall base. The other thread that I use, again on a ceramic tip bobbin, is the flat wax nylon for when I do need to build up a heavier base a lot quicker. And then a couple of pairs of scissors. This one's a Dr. Slick scissor. It's got a little finer point that I use for getting in close to trim the deer hair down. These are just a generic utility, fly tying scissor. Nothing really too remarkable about them, but they do a great job. Sharp scissors are a great thing to have. And then, of course, always Zap-A-Gap, because you have to glue the stuff together. So anyway, that's it. We're going to get started. I'm going to show you how to make one of these. First thing we need to talk about is the hook, what we're going to use for the hook. You guys have seen me use these over and over again. This is just a Gamakatsu 1/0 trailer hook, a 210 311. Any type of J hook will work, any type at all. If you just found the Gamakatsu round bend worm hooks, in the appropriate size, those would work too. It just so happens that I have a lot of these trailer hooks, and so I wind up using them. They're a good strong hook. We'll talk about it real quick. The distance between the hook point and the shank of the hook, you want to have enough room left after the material is onto the shank. You want to have enough material left so that when the fish bites, there's enough, ow, that one just got me. There's enough hook point left so you can actually stick the fish. So the more material you use, the bigger the gap between the point and the shank needs to be. So this one, again, the River Raptor, is a little bit of a smaller profile fly, something I use for a little more specialized situations like cleaner water, prospecting and all of that. So we're going to get started with that. So again, I'm using the gel spun in black for thread because it's good and strong, doesn't build up, holds the materials good and tight. So we're just going to lay a little thread base, trim it. So I'm going to take some black schlappen to make the tail with. This pattern, it's going to be a rainbow trout color. A lot of you guys have been asking, how do you do a rainbow trout? There's a lot of rainbow trout that are, the hatcheries put in. And they actually make a really good bait fish for a huge brown, and it's one of one of the primary food sources here on the Chattahoochee River where I'm fishing. Not always, but during the spring of the year when there's a lot of hatchery fish being dumped in, we'll fish a lot of rainbow trout patterns. So I'm gonna make one of those for you today. So I'm gonna take 2 pieces of schlappen and use them for a tail, tie them in for the tail, make it about not too terribly long, because again this is a smaller profile fly. I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way as much as I can, but you guys know how it goes. It's got to get in there. So this fly, or this feather, see how it's kind of cupped going this way? You want the cup to be on the inside, because you want the 2 feathers to lay against each other. So position it there. That's about right. Loose wrap, tight wrap, check it. That's beautiful. Cinch it down. Trim the tag. You can kind of adjust that as needed. So now I'm going to lay in the other feather. You want the 2 pieces of schlappen to be as close, as close to the same as you can find them. No 2 are exactly perfect, but you want them to be as close as they can be. So now I'm going to lay the cup against the other side, just like that. That way it kind of holds them out, holds them straight, gives them some rigidity. Like so. Finish it, tie it all the way in. Good. All right, now we're going to start the process of spinning a little bit of deer hair. So when I'm thinking about these flies and what they need to look like and how they need to behave, I'm thinking about what the fish actually looks like itself. So with a rainbow trout pattern, you got a lot of choices in colors and how you want to build it. And no 2 rainbow trout patterns are the same. And no matter where you go, whether it's a hatchery fish, a hatchery rainbow trout that you're using as a food source for big browns, or even striped bass for that matter. If it's a hatchery rainbow trout, we all have caught them, and we all know what they look like, and they come in a variety of colors. Some of them are brilliant, bright, chrome looking. Some of them are a little bit darker. And so what I'll do is I'll tie 2 different type color patterns with rainbow trout. Most often, all the time, is going to be this schlappen olive for the top, the top portion of it, and then the lower portion of it is going to fluctuate between the shad gray and the pearl gray. And you can see here the difference in the 2. The fibers that you're going to be using off of the bucktail, the pearl gray is significantly brighter than the shad gray. And so you say, well, why would you pick one over the other one? The reason I would pick one over the other one would be watercolor. If the water is incredibly clear, gin clear like we have here in the spring on the Chattahoochee River, I'm probably going to go with the 2 darker colors, the darker shad gray and then the schlappen olive. But if it's in the fall of the year when we have what we call the lake turnover water, I may even use the pearl gray as opposed to the shad gray, just to lighten it up a little bit, give it that little bit brighter look. So today I'm going to use the pearl gray because it's fall and I need some flies. So we're going to use that. So first things first, I'm going to start by selecting a little bit of deer hair off of the bucktail. And I showed you in the double deceiver video how to select, bucktails by picking the, how long the fibers are, and and really kind of combing through the hair itself to get what you want. So this one was a good one. The Fish Hawk in Atlanta, Georgia, always seems to have a really good selection of bucktails in various colors, and if they don't have it in stock, they can order it for you and get it in pretty quick. So we're going to go with this one. And so I'm, kind of similar to the double deceiver, the Chattahoochee double deceiver. I'm going to lay in a little bit of hair on top with a different color on the bottom, and again and again and again, making the fly. So this is a smaller fly and a smaller profile fly, not as big as the double deceiver. So it's going to go a little bit quicker. We're not going to use as much hair as we did on the other one. This is one of the prototypes, one of the first ones I did that worked out fine, and I learned what I needed to out of that one so that I could move on. So I'm going to start by just selecting a little bit of hair here, and I'm thinking about as I'm selecting this hair and these fibers, I'm thinking about what does a rainbow trout look like? What colors am I trying to find? So a little bit goes a long way. So I'm going to flip out the guard hairs here and get it down. You don't want a big glob of deer hair to lay up on there. You just want a little bit, about the size of about half the size of a number 2 pencil is really about the amount that you want. You don't want to lay all of it on there because you don't want all of this hair sticking up, because remember, we're creating a smaller profile. So I'm probably going to use about half of it. And I'm not going to spin it all the way around the hook like I have in the past. We're just going to lay some in, hold it tight to the top, and make 2 wraps. Tighten it down, holding the hair in place so that it doesn't spin. 2 wraps and cinch, 2 wraps and cinch. Now I've got what I want. I can pull out this excess. Trim it. If you like to make a mess on your tying table, you can just trim it straight out like so. Try to not cut your thread like I almost did. Alright, so I've got it all trimmed back how I want it. Oh, look at that. I did cut my thread. It's a good thing I cinched it down. That's one of the reasons I used the gel spun, is because once you cinch it down and get it tight, even if you accidentally cut your thread, it'll hold it in place long enough. Maybe time for a new pair of scissors. It'll hold it in place long enough so that you can fix your mistake, fix your screw up. Alright, so that's done. So now I've got a nice little bit of olive on the back there going over top of the tail. So I'm going to come out in front of that. It's one of the reasons I like the Dynaking Barracuda, or any rotary vise is really critical for tying these type flies, because you have to be able to spin it upside down to lay in your next color selection. So now we're going to go with the pearl gray. And again, we're looking at the fibers here. These all look really good. You can tell the difference. You can see the difference in the type of fibers down here nearer to the base. They're a little more round, whereas up here near the end of the tail, they're a little more wiry. The action is basically the same. It's not going to change too much. So I'm going to take some of these from up top. Again, not too many. So I'm going to lay this in, but here again, I'm still thinking about the body shape of the rainbow trout. And what does it look like? It doesn't have a whole lot of gray color all the way back here to the tail, so I'm going to shorten this up to about there. Make 1, 2, 3 wraps. Straighten myself up, and then cinch it really good. Just like so. Of course, the Well, I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way so you guys can see, but the longer your scrap is out front, obviously the easier it is to clean that up. So now I'm going to make another wrap here, cinch it all down. If you wanted to, in between these steps, if you wanted to put like a little bit of Zap-A-Gap on there onto the hair to hold it down, hold it in place, you could. But I've found that if you just use this gel spun thread, you won't really have to. So now I'm going to go back to olive. We're just going to kind of repeat this process over and over until we get the rear hook completed. Alright, so flipped out my guard hairs. So as the fly builds and we're coming up this way, you're going to want to add just a little more material. Give it a little more volume, a little more height. 3 wraps. Snug it. Snug it again. Pull the scraps. The cleanup on the trimmings is really pretty special. But it's important when you're trimming it up out here to get it good and close. So now I'm going to finish this again. One thing about tying these flies, using a lot of deer hair, bucktails, you're going to go through a substantial amount of thread. So the gel spun is not cheap, but it is certainly some of the easiest stuff to work with out there. So I always recommend having several spools of it laying around at your disposal. So now it's going to be time for another little bit of pearl gray. Lay it in. Three wraps, snug. 3 wraps, snug. Trim it close. Good scissors are paramount in trimming this deer hair. As you can see, these are starting to get a little worn down, so next trip to the fish hawk I'll be picking up some more. Finish these in. Alright, now with the rotary, you can rotate it around, check and see how everything looks. Kind of help it along if you have to, but see what we're getting here as we go through this process. And this hair, fly's not wet yet. After the fly gets wet, this on the double deceiver, after the fly gets wet, the hair's going to lay down, and as you pull it through the water, the hair's going to lay down a pretty good bit. So right now it's all standing straight up, kind of like static electricity, but it's going to lay down a good bit, and that's what you want for this smaller profile. So we're going to do one more olive, probably a pretty good size one, I would think. a lot of people ask, well, how do you know? How do you know how much? How do you know how little? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? So honestly, the way I do it is almost 100% just by look and feel. And if it looks right as it goes on, then chances are it's going to be right. So 1, 2, 3, snug, snug. That looks right. So now I got a little business going on here, and these are always a little more difficult to trim back. It takes a little more time. You want to hold back your long tail fibers that you've just tied in there. Again, this is where the rotary vise is pretty important. Doesn't have to be textbook perfect on the trim job up here at the head. We're going to call it good on this one and not put in any more gray, because your lighter colors in the fly, like the pearl gray that I'm using on this one, your lighter colors in the fly, actually, it's that whole deal where a little bit goes a long way. So you don't have to have an equal part light color to dark color. Anytime you've looked at a bait fish's back, looking at it, it's more predominantly dark on the top than it is light on the bottom. But going back to what we've talked about on other videos, like the flaming chicken video, where a bait fish or a predator fish is always going to come at a bait fish from the bottom. So when you're looking, you want that fly to have the right profile as looking up, from the bottom of the fish itself, because that's where the eyeballs are situated on a fish's head, so that they're always kind of looking up. So here we're just going to finish this out. Clean that up a little bit with some different scissors. So it's just a little more, these scissors, these are Dr. Slick, they're a little more pointed. Helps you get in there to some of the tougher spots to clean it up. And you don't have to do this for performance of the fly. The fly is still going to have good action. It just looks a little nicer and looks like you took the time to care about the outcome of your fly. I'm going to call that good. A little Zap-A-Gap on. She's all glued up, trimmed. So I'm going to let that glue sit for a second so you can see what we've got here. Got a nice olive top, black tail, gray bottom. It's even on both sides. And you say, well, gosh, why wouldn't you just use an olive, an olive colored tail? Like maybe I would use this color olive in the tail instead of black. Now, that's a great question. One of the reasons that I'm almost always use a black tail is because the feathers, when you cup them, like we've done here, when you cup them in like so, as you pull the fly, as you strip the fly, pull it through the water, the cupping of those two feathers makes this tail go back and forth. It makes it swim. And so you want that visual to the fish as much as possible. And I feel like with the black, you can see it. You can see the swimming of the black feathers way better than you can on the olive feathers. Not that it still gives it the same action, it still swims. I just think that the black shows up better. I mean, to a point that I've had clients in the boat when they're stripping their fly back in and they see it swimming. They like the double deceiver. I mean, they see it swimming and they actually think for a split second that it is a baby brown trout swimming back to the boat, only to realize, oh wait, that's my fly. And so I've tied a lot of them, trying to match the tail colors up, to the top color or even to the bottom color, and you just don't see the action of the black tail as much as you do here. So, one of the major differences in the river raptor fly as opposed to the double deceiver or a lot of the flies that I tie, a lot of my flies, have double hooks on them, and certainly you could tie this fly with a double hook, no problem. But in a lot of cases, you just can't fish with the double hook. In some areas, it's regulated, that you just can't go that way. And so, one of the things I'm using, you can use a number of different things that are out there, but one of the things I'm using is this is Senyo's articulated shank for steelhead and salmon flies, and it just so happens I had a bunch of them laying around. They work great, no problem. And I like this length for this fly because it gives us just that little bit extra. Out here, you can do whatever length on them you want, but I feel like this one is about right. I'm using the one aught hook, and so by the time it's all said and done, the shank on the steelhead shank, 40 millimeter steelhead shank, is about the same as this 1/0 hook. So it works out. It works out appropriately. So that's probably dry enough. Take that out. So there's a couple of steps to the shanks here that are pretty critical. We don't use, on this particular fly, we don't use any monofilament to achieve the articulation. This one just hooks in there. This is why it's important that the super glue is dry. So now, that's just hooked in there. So now what I have to do, and this is kind of the tricky part, I'm going to try and do this, keep my hands out of the way as much as possible. But what you have to do, what you want to do, is you want to hook in just this part of the shank into the jaws of the vise, because you still got to cinch it all down and close it up. So I'm going to hold it out here, and you may have to readjust the jaws on your vise. You may not. I don't think I'm going to have to readjust them here. Alright, I think that's going to work. It's going to need some babysitting, but that's just the nature of creating these flies. So now I've got this in, and you can see there's a gap here, right here. So I'm going to close that up with thread, and you can see there's a gap up here. So I'm going to close all of this up with thread. And I'm not going to use my gel spun to do it with, because the gel spun doesn't build and doesn't work as quickly for these type projects. So I'm going to switch over to the flat wax nylon. Doesn't really matter what color you use in it. I just happen to have gray sitting around. The flat wax nylon builds quickly, it's strong, it wraps quickly, and it just makes quick work of what you got going on here that you have to deal with. As you can see, I already pulled her free, so I'm going to try and keep my hands out of the way as much as I can. This is the tricky part, because once you start wrapping out here, there's a lot of leverage going back on the vise, and it may even be a case where after I get done wrapping this, I'm probably going to tighten up the jaws a little bit. So we'll just go ahead and build this out. Oh yeah, we'll definitely tighten that up. So I'm out here at the end. You don't have to go all the way out there. I like to go most of the way, about like so. It's where you want it. I'm going to come all all the way back. Okay, so I'm just going to whip finish this out. Trim it, get it out of the way. Alright, so now we're going to make an adjustment on the program here. I'm going to take this out. So to tighten the jaws of your vise, most all of them are the same. This is a Dynaking Barracuda. Most any fly tying vices are going to be the same. You don't have to turn it much to get a lot of results. So I just turned it a little bit there. Still going to be kind of loose, but that's probably all I'm going to be able to get out of it. So it's going to be a little more difficult, and that's just the nature of the game. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this up. You can see where I whip finished it. It kind of came loose out there, and that's no big deal. I'm just going to cover it up a little with some gel spun. Okay, so now we're going to get back to building with deer hair. So select a little bit of olive to go on the top. You know, this is going to be the bigger and bulkier part of the fly, so I'm going to want a little bit longer fibers. Maybe a little more than before, maybe a little bit larger diameter than before. This is probably almost the size of a number 2 pencil. One, two, three. Tight. 2, 3. So that's in there. Now we're going to trim and make a mess. Switch over to my finer trim scissors. See, my hook shank's already, or my shank is already moving around. That's alright, we can deal with it. Alright, so that guy's in there. So now we're ready to flip it over. This is where it gets interesting, because inherently you're going to be pulling down on the shank, so you're going to want to have to hold it here to keep the shank still while you tie in that bit of gray. Anything that's hard to make has to catch fish. So again, I'm not going to use a significant amount of the pearl gray, because a little bit of the light color goes a long way. You don't want to overpower the back of the fish. Three wraps, cinch it. I know my hand's in the way here, but if I let go of this shank, it's going to be a mess and nobody's going to want to hear what I've got to say about that. So start trimming my scrap out of the way. Now, in order to simplify my life and yours too, instead of cinching it down while I had the fly rotated up, I'm just going to turn it over here like so. Hang on to it for dear life. Finish that out. All right, so you can see what we've got going on here. We've got a nice color combination going on. Reposition this just a touch. Trying to get more leverage on this thing. It doesn't seem to be working. Okay, so we just repositioned this a little bit because my shank kept wanting to squeak out of there, the jaws of the vise, and it's just something you kind of got to babysit along to make it work. So I'm going to add in right here another little bit of olive. And you don't have to stack these in. You don't have to stack in the additions as close as you do on the double deceiver. You can space them out a little bit. So on this one, I'm going to come back just a touch. Select some nice long fibers. Three wraps. Cinch. Cinch again. Cinch again. And the reason I do it that way it'll never come unbuttoned. So now I got the nice short trimmings that I need to do. Clean it up. So we're getting close here to really, you want to start thinking about the position of the head of the fly and how much more deer hair do you really want to put on here, before you want to put the head of the fly on. And it's one of my favorites, the fish mask number 10. And and so what I'll do at this point, just so that I can get a feel for how far, how much more hair I want to put on, I'll just kind of slide it up there and measure it a little bit. I want it back to about right there. So it looks like I'm going to need 2 more olive on the top and 1 more gray on the bottom, and that's going to be it. So we'll do the gray on the bottom now. Finish this out. So now I'm going to do 1 more gray on the bottom, and it's going to be a pretty substantial piece. You're going to want this about the size of the number 2 pencil. This piece would actually represent the belly, the underbelly of the fish. So flip the guard hairs out, lay it up there. Three wraps. I'm holding the shank I'm holding the shank, trying to hope and pray that it doesn't fall out of my vise. 3 and 3, and there's a wrap. And that looks just about right. So you can always see how it's splayed out a whole lot here. And typically you don't want that to be that big and bulky on this fly, So I'm going to show you, you can just wrap back over it. I'll show you that after I get this trimmed up. It's a sign of good quality bucktail when the fibers splay out really tall like that when you wrap down on it. Get some stragglers, you can trim them out of the way. You don't want any gray up on the top. Okay. So hang on to it, cinch it down. Alright, so now because I want this gray to kind of lay down a little bit more than what it's doing, I'm just going to kind of hold it back like this. Can you see that okay? I'm just going to kind of hold it back. And I'm not cinching, I'm not cranking down on it really tight. I'm just kind of coming over top of it a little bit to help it lay down so it's not standing straight up like Don King's hair. There we go. And again, in the water, that's going to help it just lay down even more. But that's about how I wanted it. So now I'm ready to do one of my last two olives. It's always good to just kind of check it, visualize it, put your mask on, kind of see how it needs to go. Might can even do one more gray, maybe. So we'll take another good sized piece of olive. So I got it wrapped 3 times. I'm about to pull it tight. One, two, three. Again. Oh, and I made a critical error. I got a little bit of my gray in there. Get that all out of the way. Get it trimmed up, and we're going to do a fit check again with the mask. Because the worst thing you can do is put too much material on here. You want just enough so that everything works right. So if you put too much material top or bottom, the fly won't ride. It won't track straight through the water. And I'm not really a big fan of heavily weighted flies. So what I try and do is make my flies with no weight on them at all, because I find that people can cast those a lot easier than weighted flies. And so when you fish with a sinking line, you can then fish whatever sinking rate line that you want, and it seems to work. Okay, so now I'm going to check the mask again, check the fit. And we're getting pretty close. I almost think, yep, we're going to go with one more tiny little bit of gray on the bottom, and then we're going to call it good and put the mask on. You see, I got a lot of different colors going on here, a lot of trimming. So put just a tiny little bit of gray on the bottom here. So 3 wraps, hanging on to the shank, pull her tight, pull her tight, and tight. Yep, that'll do. So all the way out here at the front, where the head is going to be, you don't have to worry too much about trimming it as close as I did in the other portions that we tied in, because your fish mask is going to go over it, and you want it to have just a little bit of substance in there for the glue to grip and adhere to. Should be good. Alright, and likewise, the same as I did on the last one. I don't want it to be all stuffed up too much, so I'm just going to come back, hold it down. I'm going to tie this down a little. Alright. So now I'm going to come out, finish it out here near the front, kind of smooth it over some. Give a nice foundation for the mask to hang on to. A little zapper gap, maybe a little too much. It'll be fine. Got a little glue on my thread. Okay, so that part's done. Okay, so we had to make a quick microphone adjustment there. So anyway, we've gotten to this point. We've got our gray laid in on the bottom, the olive on the top, the tail, the shank, everything's whip finished up here and glued. And so now comes the time where, you know, this is a rainbow trout. We all know that rainbow trout have a pink or reddish stripe down their side. And, you know, here again, you don't want to select a feather that's going to be so overpowering as to kill the effect of the rest of the fly, but yet it's got to look kind of right. You know, so I use the big musky feathers, musky schlappen. It's hard to find. There's not a lot of it. When you do find it, it's very expensive, but it makes a great fly and gives a lot of good action. And so the feather width that you want to select for this, you know, it's really just going to, excuse me, it's really just going to be dependent upon how much do you want there, you know. So honestly, I really only want about this much. And you say, well, why would you use that? Why wouldn't you just use one of these big feathers, big wide feathers with a, you know, big broad pink band all the way down the side of it? And you certainly could use this one without question. You could. Just know that when you use these big wide feathers, it affects how the bait swims. You know, you want your fly to swim like a trout, and you want it to behave like one. You want it to have some erratic motion and behavior, but you don't want it to be all over the place, because typically you're fishing this color in a clearer water condition. So you want it to kind of be subtle. So I'm going to pick this feather to go on this side. So I'm going to restart my thread. After I finished everything out, I didn't start my thread back, so we're going to start that back. Definitely time for a new pair of scissors. Alright, so I'm going to lay my feather up here, kind of get it positioned how I want it. And I always start with a couple of loose, 3-4 loose wraps. That way I can still kind of position that feather how I want. Then snug it down. And so the glue that's on there kind of helps hold it in place on the side. So we've got her on there on that side. We can trim it. Now I'm going to come to this side. Another great reason for the rotary vise. So now I want to pick a feather out of this bunch that's pretty close to the same as this one. Looks like that's going to be it. Lay that in. Do the same nice soft wraps in the beginning. Now she's all laid in there. Now I can really crank it down. Get my deer hair out of the way. Okay, that's done. Now what's happened here is at some point I got my feathers a little mixed, a little crossed up, so I'm just going to go in here and finish that just a tiny bit, hold it in place. There, that's it. Okay, whip finish. Done with the gel spun. Alright, now I'm going to fit with this mask. It's important when you fit with the mask, you look at it on both sides. Make sure everything's even. We're going to coat the inside with glue. And hold it up there just until it sets. Make sure it's even up there at the front. Make sure your feathers are even. And it is. And so now I'm going to switch from the gel spun thread back to the flat wax nylon. And all I'm going to do is just start this out like I've done on all the other ones. Hold this shank. It's kind of tricky. You got a lot going on here. I'm just building a little bit. The head's still kind of wiggling around there, so you want to always check it, make sure it's still even. I'm just building up a base in front of the mask. Help keep it in place is all I'm doing. I'm going to whip finish. So that's done. Now we're gonna kill several birds with one stone here. I'm gonna glue the head and the eyes all at the same time. So first thing I want to do, put some glue on there, let it kind of spin your vise, kind of let it roll around. Kind of coats it all in. Alright, so both eyeballs are laid in there. I'm just going to kind of rotate around and look at it. Make sure she looks right. It does. And that's it. So that is the river raptor, tied in rainbow trout colors. Looks pretty good. It's going to swim even better and stuff a whole lot of big brown trout. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you got any questions, you can always email in the spread. I'm gone part of the year. I'm in Alaska part of the year, so I can't always respond to emails as quickly as I would like to. But if you got any questions, anything about the flies in any of our videos, you can always email in the spread, and one of the guys is always there available to at least get you on the right track going, or can at least forward the message on to me somehow. So appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed it.